Well, I was born and raised in Monmouth, Illinois, which is a small little rural community in western Illinois, almost in Iowa, about 12 miles east of the Mississippi River in northwestern Illinois. My mother and father were both born in that same town. My mom was born a half a block up the street. I'm not certain about my father. I know he was born in Monmouth, but I don't know for certain just where in the city he was born, or the town. It's a town of 9,000, and there were 250 black folks.
What was your mother's main name?
Thomas. Her name is Fenimore Thomas. And my children were, well, actually, they think they were born here, but they both were born in Illinois. Our son, Peter, was born in Chicago, Michael Reese Hospital, in 1963. And we moved out here when he was 5 months old. And when my wife became pregnant with our daughter in 65, she went back to Monmouth, Illinois, and our daughter Tracy was born in Monmouth Hospital. My wife and I both were born at home. I have a sister in Chicago, an older sister, and I have a younger brother who is sort of the baby of the family, lives in Boulder, and he's worked in Boulder ever since college. He has worked with the Boulder Sheriff's Department. And I had two sisters, both of whom were younger than myself, but both have died. One died tragically at 20 in a car accident, and then we lost my other sister to a lung problem. She had died here in Denver in 1975. I grew up in Monmouth, spent all of my time in Monmouth, Illinois, till I went to the Air Force and at the age of 18, right out of high school. I went to the Air Force and stayed 4 years, then went back to Monmouth after the Air Force. My dad was a potter. He worked for a local pottery. Before that, he worked as a veterinarian's helper. I think he would have loved to have been a veterinarian, but he worked in a pottery. Not a good job, nor an easy job. He worked in the clay room where he made the clay from bags of dust. And so, of course, he inhaled dust for 20, 25 years, and which, of course, caused him to have lung problems. My mother was pretty much a homemaker. She worked tiny bit for domestically for some of the richer folks on the north side of town, but not much. I think she preferred to stay at home, have less money, but raise the kids at home. She's a homemaker. She was, as I mentioned, born just a half a block from where I was born. Her mother, by the way, was born out in the country from that little town in a place called Colebrook, Illinois, which is about 10 miles into the country from where we lived and were born. My father's family was from Missouri, Frankfort, Hannibal, that part of this state of Missouri. But mother stayed home. I think she decided that she'd rather raise the kids than work domestically. She wasn't really fond of that kind of work. They both went to school in Monmouth, and they attended the elementary school there on the north side of town. We actually lived on the north side of town where most of the black folks, all 250 of us, the majority lived on the south end. But my grandmother lived on the north end, and we lived with her. And so they went to school at the elementary school on the north side of town. Then they both attended Monmouth High School. And as I mentioned, my mother and father and my elder sister and myself had the same English teachers our freshman and sophomore year as our mother and father. I guess not being aware or not being bothered by some of the segregation that was there. There was not a lot, but there was some. And it was an absolutely wonderful childhood. You know, you played softball and baseball all summer, and you played touch football, and you hung out in the woods, and you know, it was a great childhood. Although we couldn't swim in the YMCA pool. if we had been inclined to want to shoot pool in the 3 or 4 pool halls in our hometown, we couldn't have done that. So it was like many parts of the USA in the 30s and 40s and 50s. There was discrimination and segregation, although it was very subtle, but it was there. And I didn't get really serious about what it meant till I came back from the Air Force and attended college and then would go home on the weekend. And at that point, I was very aware of what it had been like, and we've discussed it many times with many people. But it was a wonderful childhood, all things considered. We went to Calvary Baptist Church every Sunday. We'd walk right down First Street and go down to Calvary Baptist, which is on the south end on First Street. Sometimes the kids in Calvary would chase us back to North End because they thought we were peculiar because we lived on the north side of town. But by and large, they treated us pretty nicely. We always had, of course, we attended the Sunday school picnics. And I grew up initially in the Baptist church and didn't realize how I ended up in the AME church. And my sister said, well, if you remember when Grandma Groff died, which was my dad's mother, who was Baptist, the following Sunday we went to the AME church. My mother, who was AME, so she obviously was just sort of waiting until she was in charge. And so I would say from age of 12, we were AMEs, and we still are. My wife and our son moved out here in 1963, after I'd spent a year working in Chicago after college. And I came out for a teaching position and came out and began teaching at Smiley Junior High School. Well, it was a lot of fun. It was my first teaching experience out of college. I had worked as a caseworker for Cook County in Chicago right out of college. So this was my first teaching job, although I had taught at Western Illinois, at the lab school, Western High School. So it was great fun. When I arrived, there were 4 black teachers. And I taught American history, 8th grade American history, 7th grade geography, 9th grade civics. And we had a very open-minded principal. The staff was very friendly. The school was slowly becoming more integrated because Smiley had been less integrated, but it was becoming more integrated as black people moved across Colorado Boulevard. So I had an opportunity to kind of watch that happen. It was a great experience. I taught there 3 years, and it was just a lot of fun, and the faculty was easy to work with, and it was just a fine experience. I went to Western Illinois University. For my bachelor's, I got a master's at the University of Denver.
And the college experience there?
Well, it was interesting. There were 28 African-American males and 5 girls. The girls used to put us on a list and said, you know, if you're interested, you could maybe take me for pizza next Wednesday. I could work you in. So they had a wonderful situation there. That also was beginning to change. By the time my senior year, that was in '58. In '62, by my senior year, we probably had 100 black kids. So it had changed considerably. It too was a good experience. Most of the males were all athletes, and really some really extraordinary athletes. Several went into the NFL, and they were very successful. I was an ex-serviceman, so I was pretty serious about trying to study. I didn't know how long I'd last. Not to mention the fact that at 22, those athletes looked pretty big to me. I think there are more kids are going to college each year. And so I think it was just a case of more people coming to school. I know Chicago, and it might have been that the schools were were suggesting in some of the state schools, because we did get more kids from Chicago down to Western each year. They had heretofore gone either to Eastern Illinois or to school in Chicago. And so those, yeah, so perhaps it was some encouragement to get them there. But it was certainly growing, and I think a lot of it had to do with more and more black kids going to school back to that period. In many ways, our community has changed a lot. It's been, when I first moved here, my wife and I would go looking for houses around Smiley. And we would show up, and they would say, sorry, we just rented it, or we don't rent to black people. I mean, sometimes it's totally nice, so we don't rent to Negroes. But they always had a story. It got to the point where she and I would call up and say, listen, we're black. So if you don't want to rent to us, tell us now. We won't come out to look at it. And we finally ended up living in the black principal at Cole's house, Harold Scott, who had gone on sabbatical for a year back to NYU, New York University. So my 5-month-old, my wife and I moved into his house for a year. So we never did get any of those houses up in Park Hill until later. And so one of the things that's changed, although I do believe that in the year 2001, I do believe there's still housing discrimination. And I believe it exists in this state. I don't believe it's rampant, but I think it exists. And I think it can be proven by just simply having a white man and a black man at different times go looking for different apartments in different places, looking for houses by themselves in different places, and then compare how they were treated. I just believe that still exists. But I do think, though, that over the long haul there has been a big, large movement from the old days, the segregated communities. We still have a community where black people live largely, but black people also live, and Hispanics live all over the city and in virtually all the suburbs. So there has been a considerable amount of integration and movement. I think that politics has certainly improved for minorities. You know, we've had a black mayor, a Hispanic mayor, we've had a number of black presidents of city council, we've had black presidents of the Denver School Board, had a black superintendent of schools. So clearly, you had 2 black lieutenant governors, one from each party. So I think without a doubt, politics has improved, opportunities in politics has improved for minority people and for black people. But I think, though, that when you walk down 17th at lunch hour here, you still don't see that many of us coming out of those buildings along 17th. The boardrooms are still pretty white. So I don't think that it's changed anywhere near as much as it needs to. But yet, you know, things have improved.
What's your feeling about the education system?
I think education has not improved very much. And I think education's failing black children in the year 2001, all over the USA, including Denver. Too many of our children simply are not finishing school. They're just not. And there has to be a reason. And, you know, we're subjected to all sorts of gimmicks like vouchers and schools of choice and charters, instead of putting the money into public education and demanding that public education find a way to educate all children. I mean, we didn't suddenly grow a generation of kids who couldn't read. They can't read because, well, there are some reasons. Some have to do with home, because of TV, they can watch TV instead of reading the paper. My sisters and I used to lay on the floor on Sunday and imitate my mom and dad reading Chicago Tribune. And we could not wait until we could read the funnies. I mean, we could not wait. I mean, the first time I remember being able to lay there and read the funny paper was an exciting time. But there was no television. No TV, hadn't been invented yet. And so we had radio, and we'd sit around the house at night and listen to Fibber McGee and Molly and all those things. And so there's a little more close-knitness, and because there was less to do, you read a lot more. And you got involved in reading clubs at the library and see how many little minnows you could get on a string and all that. And because that's what there was available. And so it was a different kind of life. So kids come less prepared. But since schools understand that and they're professional, then they should have a program to deal with the clients they get. And they haven't done a very good job of it. And those who want to say, well, give somebody over by Ebert $2,500 and then try to let this black lady with $2,500 try to get her kid in some private school somewhere instead of making Ebert the best school it can be, doesn't make any sense to me. Or say, well, your kid can get into, your kids, if they can get out to Lakewood, they can go to Eagle, Nest Elementary School. How are they going to get there, and why do they want to go? So schools of choice don't mean very much. And charter schools, perhaps they could work, but it's slow. You don't know what you're going to get. A lot of them don't work that well. And whether they help the kids who are having the most trouble in school, the large number of minority children, the large number of black children, I don't know that charter schools will help them anyway. So we just need to make the schools better. Teachers and educators need to find a way to educate all children. And of course it wouldn't hurt to make the job more desirable so a lot of people would want to be a teacher instead of wanting to be even a fireman where they can start at $35,000 versus $25,000. So there are a lot of things that need to be done in public education, most of which have not been done yet. We have to convince our children that we're still a pretty dignified people and that we care about who we are and where we end up. And what bothers me the most is the negative attitude that kids have about, for example, the rap. I don't have any trouble with the form, I don't care for it, but the form that says, well, I'm just talking about how bad things are. Well, things have always been bad for us. And if you're not going to talk about how bad they are and how we have to deal with them to survive, then you're doing a lot of harm by just saying how bad they are. Because many people who are influenced by them are going to assume that, okay, they're terrible and there are no ways to deal with it. So I think we have to begin to tell our children and the parents in the same room that we have certain